Home Life. It's Home Plus Life Podcast.
And we're back.
Hey.
We're back. Take two.
Right, so we're talking about the rental crisis.
Yeah.
And is it PIPA?
PIPA.
A PIPA report?
So it's the Property Investment Professionals Association report. Every year they do an investor sentiment report, and they have a look at how investors are feeling, what's going on in their world, what their motivations are, and what they've done over the last 12 months. Comes out this time around, so the 12 months was to August 2023. Mm-hmm. And it's been released, and there's some pretty amazing data in it that's come out. And look, there's some of the data I feel like a few people are going to sort of celebrate and be like, yay, but look, let's approach this without emotion. I think that it's housing, so it's a very emotional topic, full stop. And I think there's been a narrative in the media and, a narrative that's been pushed by the government that, investors are greedy and evil and bad and all these sorts of things. And that's not actually true. And we've got some data that proves that. But most importantly, we actually need to understand, if we put all emotion aside, we need to understand that our housing market is an ecosystem. And all parts of the ecosystem need to work together in order for it to operate, to be healthy, right? Much like our environment. And right now we have narratives that are trying to divide up the various different parts of the ecosystem, turn them against each other, and that is hurting the overall.
Yeah.
That's hurting everybody. This narrative from the government that investors are the problem, investors are bad, but the government's not stepping up to build more houses. At the end of the day, we all need each other and we all need to come to the table and work together.
They sound like a really good bunch of narcissists.
That is the pop culture word of the day in Instagram feeds all over the place. But
let's look at it realistically. Yeah. Don't take responsibility for any of my actions, but I'll certainly tell you where you're stuffing up.
I'll blame everyone else for my screw up.
Yeah.
But the previous year's PIPA report, and they mention it in this report, they talk about how 19% of investors surveyed, so they surveyed about 2,000 investors, rough figures, I think it was about 1,800 and change or 1,700 and change, something like that. Last year, 19% of them said they were contemplating selling. 12.1% went on to actually sell the investment properties they have. Now, again, just hold on, everybody. Just wait. This is not cause for celebration, and I'll explain why in a second. Now, nearly 74% of these properties got sold to owner-occupiers. Now, to put that in perspective as to what normally happens when a rental property goes to market in terms of losses from a property management business, right? Because that's the best place we've got to track and work out, what's the normal kind of turnover and that. Normal turnover in a property management business on a rent roll is about 4% of properties get sold annually, right? Yeah. And there's a 60-40, 50-50, 40-60. I
do just have to quickly interject here. For those people that don't know what rent rolls are, if it's new, because it has been new to me, it's only been probably in the past 6 months really that I even knew what it really was. So a property manager has a rent roll, and on that rent roll is the list of all of the people that have the property.
Not the people's,
but the properties.
It's think of it, it's a roll call of the properties that they manage.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it is.
What they're saying here is that 12% of nationwide.
Yeah, 12% nationwide
had gone and sold
rent rolls. Now,
yes,
typically a typical rate of percentage of sales is about 4%.
Yeah.
So annually 4% of properties between 3 and 5. So I just call it the other mill, call it 4. Let's stop splitting hairs. 4% turnover, and they go to market and sell. And depending on the year and the sentiment, it's a 40-60, 50-50, 60-40 split between investors and owner-occupiers as to who buys these properties.
So they're normally pretty tight.
They're normally pretty, there's
it's not like 90-10.
No. Or it's not like what it is right now where it's 74-26. So 74% of properties that left rent rolls, and we've had 3 times as much as the average properties being sold off rent rolls in the 12 months to August 2023, and 73.4% of them, so I'm just saying 74 is round figures, were sold to owner-occupiers. Now,
That's a big chunk out
That's a massive chunk. That's 217,000 properties that disappeared out of the rental market.
Yeah.
Why is this a problem? Why aren't we celebrating? That's more owner occupiers into homes, right? Which is also one of the goals, one of the things we want.
Yeah, but it's 217,000 properties that have taken, and now we've got, let's say, on average, let's say that there's one person that's in those homes.
It's 2.4.
Okay.
On average.
So that's nearly 500,000 people that don't
in the
actually...
rental market, we can now house 500,000 or 650,000 less people.
Yeah.
As a result.
Which is quite significant.
No, yeah, 500,000, you were
and
right.
And those are just in this past 12 months. That's not
in the 12
the
months
12
to
months
August 23, right?
Yeah. So that's not the 12,
but
the
investors
last,
also aren't
3-4
buying
years.
back in. They're selling and offloading, they're not buying back in.
Yeah.
So we're not replenishing the rental stock. Now, owner-occupiers are rejoicing, which I understand why, but hold the phone. This creates a monumental problem because there are people who rent that could afford to buy. So that pushes upward pressure because now they've got to move out of this market and start buying, right? And so they do that, which puts upward pressure on property prices. If you own, that's great. But if you're trying to get in, not so much. So there's more competition there. But more importantly, we've got less ability to house the most vulnerable, in many cases, of our society, which means more people living in cars, more homeless people. Like, it creates a monumental problem. And the reason that we look at it and we go, hang on, we've got to look at this a little bit better, is because owner-occupiers, people buying houses have the ability to build. And there's incentives to do that. Renters can't build new rent dwellings. So in terms of looking at the housing crisis as a whole, all we're doing is shifting. We're literally playing, three-card Monty and moving the pain from one area to another. The problem is with this...
the term whack-a-mole. I feel like that's what's happening here.
I mean, look, either way, we're moving the pain...
It's not actually solving anything.
...onto the most vulnerable.
We're just hitting something on the head and moving on to the next one.
Which, I mean, that's been government policy for how long, right? It's the problem with having a 4-year term, is that you're going to get held... if you do something that's long-term and it hasn't completed yet, no one's got the patience to give you a second term, and the opposition will turn around and... I mean, look at the NBN, right? Liberals got in by hammering the NBN and being over budget, and that we've still got the slowest internet in the world when the NBN was meant to improve that, in terms of first world countries. So I understand it. I understand why the government is really hesitant to take on multi-generational, multi-term projects. I do get that. However, our emotions in the marketplace are also directing that. We're getting upset because rents are going up, mortgages are going up, house prices are going up. There is a housing crisis.
I would actually like it to have a politician that comes in. You know how, like the ones that we taught about in school where they've gone and done something monumental of the time, where it's written down in history books where you just go, wow, like that person really changed something. Yeah. And I can't say in recent years that there's people that have actually come in where you just go, wow, that person really changed the direction of Australia.
And a lot of that, well, I mean, you've got Paul Keating, that direction, not so great. But like a few of them did some good things. But yeah, in the last 10, 15 years, there's been nothing. And it's been tit
more,
for tat.
It's been more about who's the popular kid, even within their own parties. Look at good old K-Rudd.
This is media bipartisan reporting, right? Like the media, if you look at media over the last 15, 20 years, they've really gone hard to try and divide us into different groups, right? You're either for or against. And we talked about this on a previous episode about political identity and so forth. So, and this is an issue that needs multi-generational solutions, multi-term solutions.
Minimum.
But coming back to this data, there's 2 states that investors have abandoned more than any other.
I know. Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, Victoria and Queensland.
Absolutely. And investors are bailing. And that's the thing is there's a population influx happening in Queensland at the moment. So we actually need more investors to be buying in, yet they're playing silly buggers with the legislation, and they're leaning too far. And please understand, like, I'm not saying that tenants don't deserve rights. Tenants absolutely deserve rights. We're tenants, right? So I'm not campaigning for something that
we're not a part of.
That we're not a part of. What I'm trying to say is we need to approach the table with an understanding of the big picture, right? And the fact that we're all part of an ecosystem, we all need to work together. Because if the laws go too far one way in favour of the tenants, investors leave, which exacerbates a rental crisis because there's less supply, right? And that's what's happening right now.
Plus the fact that, if it's tended more towards the tenants, having that means that you're going to have people who will use and abuse. Now, I'm not saying every renter, because I'm a renter, he's a renter, but there will be people who always take opportunity for a loophole.
Who use and abuse.
And so what does that mean? It means that when you have people who are legitimately trying to find a property, and we'd spoken about it previously, where it is actually happening down in Victoria, where it's really hard to get someone out of a property, and yet you've got all of these people wanting to actually pay to have somewhere to live, and they can't get anywhere because you've got people who are essentially squatting, I suppose you could.
They're not. They're paying rent, but they're not living up to the tenancy agreement. They're not abiding by it. But you look at certain laws, like in Queensland,
which
the new
is
laws,
unfair when you think about it.
It's unfair, and it's a breach of contract. But if I did that commercially, I would be sued to within an inch of my life.
But not only that, if you've got someone who is working their guts out to make sure that they can house not only themselves, but there's most likely children as well, and they're trying their best to actually get into those places, but there's tenants there who aren't doing what they should be, and yet you've got a person who does want it, and they can't. So, it's just adding more crappiness to a already crappy situation.
Absolutely. And the thing is, the government is removing flexibility, or Queensland government at least is removing flexibility in negotiating tenancies and conditions on tenancies and things like that, which never works well. When the moment the government steps in and says we're going to make it really one size fits all and attempts to do that, it just breaks everything, right? And that's what's happening in Queensland. But
are you telling me that there's people with different circumstances?
Yeah, I know, right? But investors are jack of it too.
Yeah.
Right? And investors are sick of the petty politics because, the government runs this narrative of all these investors who buy all this property and everything like that. So let's have a look at some actual data. Only 1 in 5 property portfolios, 1 in 5 sees positive cash flow, where it's actually paying a little bit more money to them than what it costs them.
Those
1 in
grubby
5,
investors.
Right? But that means 4 out of 5 are either neutral, as in it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Right? Or the investor is paying to keep that alive. So there's a lot of investors out there who have 1, maybe 2 properties. And the numbers of people going, they've got 5 properties, 100. There's no in near. The vast majority of Australian investors have 1 property, right? But this whole narrative that investors are greedy and all that sort of stuff, the investors are paying money out of their pocket every single week in the hopes that the capital gain and the capital growth of the property will eventually make them money. So they're effectively, in the short term, they are paying to house somebody.
Yeah.
Right? And even still, that was not a primary reason or concern for why investors and why 38% of investors are now looking at selling a property over the next 12
admittedly,
months.
there is some times there where investors do that on purpose to negative gear something.
Yeah, but negative gearing allows them, it kind of reimburses them for housing somebody, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's understood in the marketplace. And there's this whole anti-negative gearing. It's like, if you take away negative gearing, those properties go and the rental crisis gets worse. So, and the thing that does my head in, it's so often tenants who bitch and moan and protest against negative gearing. And
without it, you wouldn't have anywhere.
I'd be like, you'd be out on the street, like you're biting the hand that feeds. But 38% of investors have indicated they may sell property over the coming year, and the increase, don't get me wrong, holding costs, mortgage costs, all that, yes, that's a concern, but it is not the primary concern. The primary concern, and it's a disproportionate, was the language used in the Pippa report, disproportionate number of investors stated that it was government policy threatening to or increasing taxes and bullshit. And that was the reason why they're looking at getting out. So
yet again,
government,
the people who are there that are supposed to be representing us
are
screwing us over.
Absolutely. And this
Cheers, thanks for that, guys.
Well, and
really
this
appreciate
is it,
it.
But and on this note, like, mining companies pay one of the lowest royalties in Australia compared to the rest of the world. Yet homeowners in Australia, or people buying and selling land and homes and companies buying, developers buying and selling, building houses and land packages and all that, pay one of the highest stamp duty tax government fee rates in the world. In the world. Yet the mining companies get to take everything out of the ground on one of the lowest royalty rates in the world. I want a politician to come and explain to me how that is right. Because we're hearing all these budget surpluses, and don't get me wrong, a budget surplus is great, but a monumental chunk of state-by-state government surpluses is coming from stamp duty.
I'm not overly with it when it comes to finance. And when I mean with it, I mean as though, you know, the ins and outs of all of the nitty-gritty economical ways that countries work. But I'm pretty sure that if you are in surplus, got a crisis on your hands, even in business.
Are you about to suggest the government should spend the money to solve the crisis, being that they're in surplus for the budget?
Well, I mean, yeah, would that not make good business sense?
I mean, they've got debts and stuff to pay back because of all the stupid borrowing that they do. But, I mean, you would think so, yeah. And this...
But if you do that, you would be reinvesting back into things that you know are going to keep the country going. Because it means that you'd be able to...
It's a lot harder to work when you don't have a roof over your head, so that hurts the economy.
It's also a lot harder to be able to have immigration happen if you don't have anywhere to house. Like, what are they going to say? Don't come to Australia. They don't have houses for you.
Come to Australia, live in tents.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yay. Yeah. You know, like it's dumb.
Yeah, look, it is dumb. And I think the biggest problem is you called it whack-a-mole earlier, and I can't help but agree with that. You know, there's this 4-year shelf life on government policy. And I think there's a lot of responsibility. A lot's got to be asked of the media because politicians are terrified of the headlines that are going to come out the next day. But not only that, as I said, we saw it with the NBN. You know, the NBN ran over budget. Okay, cool. It was a monumental project. It was always going to run over budget. It was meant to upgrade our internet capability to give us, you know, some at least middling in terms of first world internet speeds.
They didn't have a problem with it on the Gold Coast about running over with the tram lines.
This is it, right? Like this is the ridiculousness of it. And then the next government came in. So during the election campaign, the Liberal Party attacked Labor, right, because they were overrun on the budget. And they used it as one of their core things. You can't trust them to manage the economy. They can't even manage the NBN. Like all this sort of stuff. And the Liberal Party got voted in. And then they turned around, slashed the budget on it, and took it from what was meant to be optic fibre to the premises in every house in Australia to this hybridized sort of multi-technology.
Yeah, you can have it, but you can't.
Well, no, it's not even that. It's, hey, you're going to run off copper to the node, and you can run off wireless, and you know, and so it's this hybrid technology that's
going to be outdated in another 10 years at least, and then where will we be?
And you
asking for NBN
you talk
again
to someone in Europe, and you go, yeah, like we got excited because we got 600 megabit per second download when we moved here. Right?
It didn't really mean anything to me.
I got very excited because I geeked out. You talk to someone in Europe, and they go, oh, that's cute. We had that in 2005, you know, but this is what happens in our political
There'll be people
system.
that'll be like, yeah, but you know, they don't have as much land as what we do. Nope, but they certainly got the population.
Yeah, and that's it. Look, but this is a big problem with our political system. And look, I put a challenge out to everybody. Go and find your local member on Facebook and ask them publicly, why are mining companies getting one of the lowest royalty rates in the world, and yet investors and property developers and owner-occupiers are paying one of the highest stamp duty rates in the world to get property and to build more property? Because it doesn't seem right to me. I mean, Norway, everyone gets free university because the mining companies pay a huge royalty, and they pay significantly greater royalty than they do here in Australia, and they can clearly afford it.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that they get free education?
Tertiary education, not just secondary.
Yeah, I know.
And it's quality. Don't even get me started on our secondary education. Holy Jesus.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to.
Yeah,
but
let's not go down there.
I am just looking at it going, hold on. I love how they say that you get free tertiary education, and it's like, no, I don't.
But this is the product of our system, right? Like, we have multiple actors within our system, and we've got political two-party preferred system. This is one of the flaws in it, right? Is it's you're either with us or against us, and both sides get to play you off against each other.
But not only that, you can have the minor parties come in and make deals with the two. Like,
absolutely, you can, and then the country gets held to ransom, and we've seen that happen too.
Yeah.
But then you get the media involved, and the media, decides, which narrative do we want to push today, right? Which one best suits us, and so they drive with that particular political party. So our democracy is heavily influenced by parties that it shouldn't be influenced by. Our members supposedly work for us, but hide behind systems and bureaucry, and we don't actually
also
get our needs
afraid
looked after.
about headlines.
Oh, yeah,
One
they're
thing that I
terrified
do
of
need
headlines.
to just pop in here is not all journalists that work for big media, like, they pay your wage, so you're going to do it. But at the same
I'm
time,
not going after the journalists here. Like, my father was a journalist. I understand what happens behind the scenes, and I understand the pressure. You got to feed your family.
all
right?
media, like, not all media outlets are actually.
Oh, there's a lot.
You know,
There's a lot across the spectrum. But my point is in Australia, something like 72% of our media is owned by one entity.
Yeah.
That creates a monopoly, and that creates an ability to sway power in the country. And we've seen it time and time again. The upside is that its power is fading because millennials and younger read the headlines and more are starting to roll our eyes.
I think it also has a lot to do with the fact that, given that we spend a lot of time on social media, and with Facebook coming in and doing that massive change a couple of years ago,
They just dropped that. They just turned
did
around
they?
and told Australian media companies that they're not going to pay them for it and they can go jump
what they've just done that now.
in the last 2 months.
Right, so what does that mean exactly?
Don't know yet, because the Australian media companies are trying to go to the High Court and all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah, they're like, we're not going to pay you. This is bullshit. We're not going to pay you, and it's.
So this is where
likely to be
this is
challenged.
what I'm talking about, where there isn't, because it used to just be a complete utter spam when you would open up your Facebook feed. It would just be news.
Yeah.
News.
They had a news tab. They created a news tab for them, and they removed that because no one was going to it. No one gave a shit.
Yeah, no one cared. Because if you did have something that you were interested in and that had caught your eye, you would share it in Messenger. You wouldn't necessarily put it. Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily put it on your feed, which means that there's not exposed, because you actually have control over it then. So that's what we're referring to.
Coming back to this issue, there's this monumental issue. There's these huge stamp duties and huge costs on everyone in the housing market except the government. They're sitting there they're Scrooge McDucking it with the money they rake in from housing. And this is I've never been able to understand. And we talked about it on a previous episode. If they swapped to a land tax and incentivise building more houses, they would create more sustainable long-term income within 3 years.
But the other thing that I find quite just mind-blowing is you have a housing department who, prior to COVID, already had a stupidly long list of trying to get people into housing.
And there's monumental problems.
Like, this is before COVID, and we're already seeing now that there's still, it's growing, if not anything.
It's
but
growing.
not just for the housing
But then
department,
you've
but
got-
for the everyday Joe who's
everyone
slogging their guts
everyone's
out.
getting smashed. And yes, the house
Not that I'm
prices
saying
keep
that
going up,
the
but-
people in housing don't slog their guts out.
No.
Like, that's not what I'm
Everyone's getting
saying.
hit, right? And everyone's getting hit because of mismanagement. But it's so bad. The problem is so bad that there was a YouTube video I sent you and that got sent to me, and someone was talking about one of the big developers, and I'm not going to name names because I can't actually remember, and I don't want to put someone in it, unfairly.
That wasn't right.
but 11,000 lots had been approved and they hadn't turned dirt on a single one. They hadn't started to build on a single one of them. And, there was, I think it might have been a question time one. Like you mentioned earlier, it could have been question time. And I was like, maybe.
No, Q&A.
Q&A, sorry. But
or Four Corners,
when you look at it, you go, okay, we have a housing market that has no supply, or that very, very limited supply. New supply is not coming into the market. House prices are incredible. The land that they've probably, and I'm assuming the land that they've bought to develop and have got approved is probably land they bought 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So they bought it at prices that make sense. So on the surface, from a business model, they should be able to be building those houses, selling them, and making a good profit. So why aren't they doing that? And the only thing that I can think of, when I look at it and I break down the numbers, is because of what we discovered when we did that episode, probably about 20, 30 episodes ago, where we discovered that anywhere up to 52% of a house and land package, and in Brisbane at the time it was 36%, was government taxes and red tape, whether it's council, state, or federal government. And it makes up. So you're looking at a $900,000 house and land build, right? And 400,000 of that, or nearly 400,000 of that, is government taxes or government expenses, right? And when you look at that and you have developers who need to finance each property development, each estate that they build, and they need to make a certain amount on it because otherwise they don't get financed for the next one, and because they can't prove track record, which means you can't build it. If I was a developer looking at that, I'd be sitting there going, I can't build until this issue is solved. Yeah. I can't build until the prices go up high enough that it makes sense and that I can keep, because the profit from one development they reinvest in the next development, and it makes and they can get the finance.
But the other thing too is that if they're not getting the reprieve now and they go and wait until an increase happens, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're still going to be able to. Well, because their costs are going to be going up anyway.
The costs will be going up, but the holding costs of land banking clearly make it a better decision to hold right now.
Well, then who's in the background doing shits and gigs?
Who's collecting 36 to 52% of the cost of a house and land package?
But then they're turning around saying that it's investors are the ones that are the problem here, and
investors are greedy and running this narrative. Really. So if investors are so greedy, then you can drop the red tape and taxes that cost up to 52% of a new house and land package then, so that we can start moving in for half the price. That sounds about right. Like if being greedy is bad, that's a fair call, right?
Well, I mean, it seems to me like they're quite happy being greedy and then pointing the finger at everyone else.
We've got a budget surplus, but you guys are all greedy. Like, spend the surplus and help them.
We've got the surplus, but you're not going to get any of the.
It's all smoke and mirrors. And the more I embed myself in the real estate and development industries, the more people I talk to, the more stuff that I see. It's an absolute farce, and the general public has no idea just how much of a rort is going on. And we're paying the price for it. We're paying higher rents. Our cost of living is going up because the cost of shelter is skyrocketing, right? And
cost of rent isn't just for housing.
No, it's not. It's commercial. It's everything.
Yeah. So
right?
It
needs to be addressed. It has to be addressed at a governmental level, and I actively encourage everyone to go and jump on as many members of Facebook as parliamentary members on Facebook, ministers, whatever, all of your representatives, and ask them the question. Make it two questions. Number one, why is it that mining companies pay so little in royalties compared to the rest of the world, and people buying houses and developing property pay so much compared to the rest of the world? Number two, why is it that government red tape, fees, charges, taxes make up to 52% of a new house and land package? How is that even remotely right?
How is that supposed to be an incentive?
How does that help the people? Because I feel, and this is something I've felt for a long time, I feel that they've forgotten that they actually are meant to be working for us.
Yeah, they work for us.
Like we're the ones who put them in
They're
power.
the ones that are representing us.
There's a
not a lobbyist.
A whole Kansas City shuffle thing happening here where it's not. Hey, everybody, look left, look left, look left. Meanwhile, we're getting absolutely rorted blind while we're busy looking elsewhere. And I think that, I get there are challenges with it, but we've seen stuff that we've suggested work.
Yeah.
We've seen stuff we've talked about work. Also, like the council, and we'll talk about this in another episode. We've got an episode coming up, not the next one, episode 59, Potential Solutions to the Housing Crisis. But, there was the council who no one wanted to chip in and develop, so they became their own developer and ended up selling 176 units.
And then went to go, and they've started
that's across 2 stages.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 176
they've
housing,
broken ground for stage 2.
Yeah, they've broken ground.
So they've
the council,
actually increased...
The council made money off that.
They actually increased their population of their small town, which means bringing in new people who have different trades and different lifestyle change and everything like that.
So it's not that it can't be done. So why is it not being done?
Yeah.
Right? And look, maybe I'm getting cynical. Maybe I am just...
You're getting like that in your old age, are you?
I don't know. But I look at it and I go, you know what? This dog don't hunt. There's a monumental issue here, and it's not the investors, it's not the tenants, it's not the homeowners. Right?
It's not. I don't feel that completely going. Oh, it's the people who are in construction. Then no,
I don't feel it's the property
because they're still running
either.
a business, and if they don't have the money, then they go to administrators.
Well,
then there's literally no one to
look
actually
at how many
build.
builders have gone under. In recent years, because they went and we're going to do fixed price contracts, and then suddenly prices shot up and they couldn't build.
Yeah.
So they ended up going under, holding costs got them, all that sort of stuff, right? So it doesn't make sense to me that corporations, and not corporate, but companies and developers whose sole mission, because you got to remember, a company has the sole mission of acting in the best interests of the shareholder, and that is their legal responsibility. And the best interests of the shareholder usually mean profit.
Yeah.
Right? Profit, because profit means dividends paid back, increase in share value, and so forth. It's one of the fundamental rules that govern our world in terms of investing in companies and things like that.
Well, it also means, too, that when it does come to potential other business ideas and stuff and ventures, they're going to go to their shareholders and say, look, what we've done with your money so far, you give us more, and...
Yeah, but that's great. That's all part of the process, but the legal responsibility is to act in the best interests.
Yeah.
Right? Of the shareholders. So how is it... And this is the thing. We have to assume at this point, with a housing crisis, a lack of supply, holding off on building and developing lots that have been approved has to be in the best interest of the shareholders. How could that be if legally profit is the gameplay, right? Gaining profit, growing the company, more revenue, more turnover, that's deemed as a standing status quo. That is in the best interest of the company. So the assumption we can make as laymen who know this much of a problem that's like this big is that it mustn't be in the best interest of the shareholders to be building now, which means that it's likely not profitable or nowhere near as profitable and therefore too high risk to build now. And so it's better and in the best interest of the shareholders to hold off and wait until conditions improve. And the only thing that I can point a finger to is that number, that up, depending on state by state, up to 52% of the house and land package goes in red tape, taxes, and government fees.
So at the moment, we're all just bending over and taking it. And
being blamed for it.
Yeah.
Like today it's the investors' fault, and it's been the investors' fault for a couple of years. Soon it'll be the tenants' fault. If you guys track your memory back, go back 10 years ago, it was tenants are bad, and tenancy insurance came about and things like that because of all the horror stories of tenants that were hitting the media and everything like that, right? And before that, property developers were bad and it was terrible, and property developers were ripping everybody off, and then they created things like the was it the Cubic, or like the builders' councils in each state who oversee stuff.
Yeah, the BCA.
And
is it BCA?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but then there was like in Queensland, I remember they created like an insurance scheme that every builder had to be a part of in case they went under, so that people stop missing out.
Which, quite honestly,
get
it does
That's
need to
good.
happen.
But my point on that is not whether those things were good or bad. My point on it is everybody takes a turn in the media as to being the problem, except the government.
Yeah.
And
right.
I come back to the story that I told a couple of episodes ago, where it's, if you put black ants and red ants into a jar, right? Those two different groups will coexist completely until someone picks up and shakes the jar. And if you shake the jar, the red ants will attack the black ants believing it's their fault. The black ants will attack the red ants believing it's their fault. And not a single ant wonders who's shaking the jar, because it's got to be the black ants or it's got to be the red ants, right? Who's shaking our jar in the housing crisis? Because it ain't the developers, it ain't the homeowners, it ain't the investors.
Well, considering we've got
tenants.
3 levels of government, and let's be honest, not all of them are necessarily required anymore.
No.
I'm just going to say it.
We have too much government and too much. We're one of the most taxed nations in the world. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So, again, jump on Facebook, make it public. That's a beautiful thing about social media. We can now go and ask questions, and I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to go and hammer our MPs, and I'm going to ask them those questions, and I'll report back on what their responses are. And if they don't respond, well, look, you know what? If they respond, we'll tell you who's responded and what they said and who it was. And if they don't respond, we'll name and shame too.
I mean,
because look, at the end of the day,
they work for us.
So we've got to make it really, really well known, don't we?
Yep.
Make sure that keep them accountable. Remember that Greens slogan from I think it was the early noughties? Keep the bastards honest. I'm not a Greens voter, but I remember that slogan. I'm like, I wish we had someone to keep the bastards honest.
I think it's cute that you think that you can. And on that note,
yeah,
peace out.